Welcome to Orchid Medley Chit Chat number 18. Today's video is about all of these orchids in front of the camera. Which ones are do-gooders and which ones are troublemakers. All of these orchids and more coming up at the Orchid Hut. Welcome back to the Orchid Hut. My name is Dana and thank you for joining me in Orchid Medley Chit Chat number 18, where you're never quite certain what we're going to talk about, but it will be something very interesting about orchids. So I've chosen all of the orchids in front of the camera today for this Orchid Medley Chit Chat, which always ends up being a very timeless sort of video because the things I'll be talking about today could very well be happening in your collection. And you know, it's going to be these orchids plus a few more that I have filmed in other growing areas around the Orchid Hut. So I'll be inserting those little clips along the way. But the very first thing that I want to talk about in the way of an update is the weather in Southeast Texas. Oh my goodness, the month of May. Well, you know, for one thing, it has been extremely dreary. You know, we have had most days being extremely cloudy, extremely overcast, and I have not been happy at all with the amount of light that the orchids recently moved outdoors have been getting. Now, when it hasn't been extremely dreary and overcast, we have had now five days where there has been the threat of severe thunderstorms with high winds, up to 70 miles per hour, along with potential hail up to the size of softball-sized hail. And I have now 5 times I have had to bring all of the orchids back inside the Orchid Hut, move every single one of them in because of the threat of severe weather. And yesterday was the 5th time I've had to do that this spring. And I'm going to insert a little clip here because it took me an hour to move all of these orchids inside the Orchid Hut where they had at least a little bit of protection from the wind and from any potential hail. Now, we did have some high winds yesterday. We did have thunderstorms. It was not nearly as bad as they forecast, but you don't want to risk your entire collection being damaged because of Mother Nature, especially when you have a way to prevent it. So I'm going to take a little bit of a break here, rearrange the orchids that are in front of the camera. Today's video is going to be divided into kind of 3 sections. In the first section, I'll be talking about the Failonopsis type things that I want to talk about. Then I'm going to move into the Cattleya orchids and maybe some other different variety of orchids. And at the very end of the video, I want to give you an update on how my Catasetinae collection is doing at this time of year. So kind of 3 main sections to the video. I'm going to take a short little break and I will be right back with the Failonopsis orchids. Okay, so this is the collection of Failonopsis orchids that I want to talk about in today's Orchid Medley Chit Chat. You know, the title of this video was Do-Gooders versus Troublemakers, and this can even be true with Failonopsis, especially when they have behavior that's a little bit unexpected. So I wanted to point out this particular Failonopsis to you and, you know, kind of have a look at it here and see if you can maybe identify what it is about this orchid that's a little bit unusual, or maybe something about this orchid that was not expected behavior. And I will tell you what happened about a month ago. So there was a leaf right here where you see this sort of dry sheath that still exists, and it began to die back, turn yellow, and it looked like the normal Failonopsis leaf drop. However, it wasn't this bottom leaf, and it wasn't this bottom leaf. It was actually a leaf here in the middle that started to turn yellow. Now, orchids can sometimes do this, and There's no particular way to identify why. It could have something to do with stress. It could have something to do with the root system, with the light, with the fertilization, with the change in location. You know, the list goes on and on. Sometimes orchids can react in unexpected ways. But this leaf continued to yellow, and it did drop off as if it were a bottom leaf that would normally yellow and drop off. Well, now I just sort of have this lopsided looking Failonopsis because there is new leaf growth here, but the plant is now unbalanced. And you know, this is not anything to worry about, except if you see this happening on one of your orchids, then it's possible that there could be a problem. There could be underlying stem rot, which you might need to keep an eye out for. There could be something that has to do with pests that may have caused that to happen. Or it could just be nothing wrong at all, and that's just the orchid's behavior. But if you see that happening, it does sort of indicate a tiny bit of closer inspection just to make sure that there's not anything else going wrong around that leaf in the middle turning yellow and dropping away. Now, just as another example, because I have another orchid that's doing the exact same thing. So this particular orchid, you would expect either this leaf to drop first, or you would expect this leaf to drop first, but that's not the case. What's happening is that the leaf in the middle is turning yellow and, you know, will be the first to go. Now, there are indications that this one may also be yellowing and falling away, and it isn't unusual for orchids to drop 2 leaves at one time. But here we go again with the leaf in the middle, kind of being the first to go. Now, you know, I don't see anything wrong with this orchid. I don't think any water has gotten down in the leaf joint. I don't see any insects. I don't see any stem rot. So again, this is just normal for this orchid. Now, just to kind of give an example of what usually happens, the bottom leaf is usually the one to yellow first and fall away. Now that's not quite ready to disconnect yet, so I'm going to leave that be. It will drop away in a few days. And this is another example of what typically happens. The bottom leaf, and this one was ready to fall away, is, you know, one of the first to go. So that's a little bit of how Phalaenopsis orchids this time of year, when they're losing their leaves, can either be do-gooders by doing what's expected, or they can be slight troublemakers by dropping a leaf in the middle, and it makes you look a little bit closer to make sure there's nothing wrong with your orchid. Okay, I will be right back with the next segment. Okay, so I wanted to show you 2 other orchids that are still hanging on in my collection, but they would definitely fall under the category of troublemakers because I'm not exactly sure what to do with them. This orchid, as well as this one, were actually caught in one of the very first hailstorms of the spring season, and they had a ton of mechanical damage to them, and I was fairly certain that some sort of infection would set in, and you know, that would be that. But there is still some green here, and on this particular Miltassia dark star, there's even some new growth coming from right here. So I might unpot this, cut away the dead pseudobulbs, and see if I can maybe just place this piece in some sphagnum and see if it takes off from here. You know, this is in the category of desperate rescue at this point, and a lot of times I kind of don't get into that because it requires extra care and attention, in addition to having to take care of over 100 other orchids. So, you know, you have to choose to want to do this. I may give this one a bit of a fighting chance. It is the only one like that in my collection. And then this one as well, Catatante Sunny Calipana. This one never really did well in my collection, and of course once it was hit by a hailstorm, well, yeah, you know, it's just in absolute pitiful shape. I don't see any new growth on this one, although I do see a little bit of new root activity down at the bottom there. I think I'm just going to let this one be for a moment and see if I can figure out what it's choosing to do. You know, there could be latent infection sort of lurking within some of these places where there were wounds. I don't know that for certain. We just have to kind of wait and see on this. But lesson learned, keep your orchids out of a hailstorm. Okay, now the next orchid that I want to show you is Sherry Baby. And I'm going to put a link in the upper right hand corner of the screen because I did a repot video on this one where it's in all lava rock, leca, and sponge rock. And there were a lot of people at the time that I don't think felt like this orchid, you know, would thrive in a potting setup like this. But I did want to show you, you know, even though we can't see what the root system is doing inside the pot, you know, the growth looks fine. This sunburn is from last year when it was sort of caught in the fall sun that was at too low of an angle and the leaf got too hot. But that's last year's damage. But since it has been repotted, there is good news here. I do see a little new root coming out the bottom of the pot right here, which lets me know that there's other probably new root activity inside this pot somewhere. And overall the bulbs look great, they look hydrated, there is some new growth going on, and so I'm pleased with how this repot went. I did want to bring this one back and show you that it was doing well. Okay, now the next two are sort of a bit different. This first one that I'm going to show you is the do-gooder, and the second one that I'm going to show you is the troublemaker. So this one was also recently repotted. It has a new growth here, great. It has some new roots right here from this new growth. And all of that is excellent news. It kind of shows that it was repotted at the correct time because the new root development now can establish itself in the new pot. So this orchid is doing well, was repotted at the right time, has new growth, new root system, you know, exactly what you would expect to happen this time of year. However, this one had a bit of a problem last year, and let me pull it out of this decorative pot so I can show you a bit better. But this orchid had a pseudobulb and a leaf that started to get some sort of rot in it, and I had to cut it away and treat it with cinnamon in a desperate attempt to keep that infection from spreading into the rhizome. And you can see a bit more of that stem actually died right there, but beneath there it's green. Now this was the end of the rhizome. This was the growth point from the rhizome. And I don't see anything at all that would indicate a new growth is going to take off from there to further develop this plant. Now I have read that some Cattleya types, and this one is Cattleya purpurata, but that some Cattleyas will have a bud further back along the rhizome that can actually sort of spring to life when called upon to continue the growth of the plant. And so as I'm looking further back on the rhizome, I'm not seeing any kind of activity like that either, except for maybe like about right there. If I'm lucky, maybe right there. There's a little swelling of a bud. But I don't know how this one is going to continue to grow at this point because, yeah, it's a little bit up in the air what this orchid is going to decide to do. So for right now in my collection, it's a bit of a troublemaker because I'm very uncertain how this orchid will continue to thrive if it doesn't figure out how to make a new growth point. Okay, so the next part of this video is going to be about my Cattleya collection. Okay, so we are indoors in my secondary growing space. Most of the light here is provided by the grow lights. There's a pair of windows over in the corner, but still most of the light is from the grow lights in this area. These two Cattleya types are just coming out of dormancy. We're going to look at the Cycnices first, and I apologize for any focusing issues here, but I am off the tripod and just trying to do this freehand. There is a new growth down at the bottom of last year's pseudobulb. And then there's this new growth on the side. And sometimes these orchids will do this. It's a little bit unnerving. If this is the only new growth you get way up high on the pseudobulb like this, it is producing some roots which may or may not reach all the way down into the media. But, you know, since there is this new growth also at the base of the bulb, I'm just going to leave this be. You know, in the wild this happens as well. There's really not a lot that you can do about it. Now, if there had not been a new growth at the base of the bulb, I may have unpotted this and turned it on its side so that the roots from this new growth higher up would have had a chance for sure to make their way into the media. But for this one, I'm just going to leave it as is. Now, this is my Fred Clark After Dark Black Pearl, and it is doing the same thing. On the older cane, there is a growth coming from the side higher up the pseudobulb. It has a lot of new little roots on it. Again, not going to do anything with this. Those roots may or may not make their way down to the media, but I'm not going to disturb this for sure because there is also a new growth down at the base of last year's pseudobulb that has roots beginning to form there. Okay, so that's an update on those two. They both would definitely be troublemakers, especially if they did not have new growth at the base of last year's pseudobulb. Now, this is my other Fred Clark After Dark Catasetum orchid. This is the burgundy spotted flowered catasetum. And this one is doing exactly what you would expect. The new growth for this year is a good 6, 7, 8 inches at this point. It has a lot of new roots, most of which have already gone down inside the pot by maybe 4 or 5 inches. I did bring this one outside just this morning to begin to acclimate it to a warmer environment, and I did just yesterday begin to introduce a little bit of trickle of water around the edge of the pot, and this morning I gave it a bit more water. The water will be increasing now from day to day, as well as the introduction of some fertilizer so that this new growth will really take off. Okay, this one is behaving exactly as expected. Thank you all so much for watching Orchid Medley Chit Chat number 18. If you enjoyed this video or learned something new, please give it a thumbs up. The subscribe button is coming up in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. Don't forget the notifications bell to let you know when I've posted something new. Talk with you all next time.